All right, folks. Welcome to the ITSEC 2022 ITSEC Fellow presentation. Thank you all for coming. Where is our esteemed conference chair here yet? As Matt Spruill would say, fellows is a big deal, right? And so since 2010, the fellow program has been a way for us to recognize contributions made by individuals to the community, right? People who've made a difference, people who've moved the needle, people who have broken and bent paradigms. And today's speaker is one of those people. Warren Katz is here with us all week, and we are going to show him some love because of what he's done for us and the body of knowledge here in our community. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce you. I'm Brian Holmes. I am the chair of the ITSEC Fellows Committee as the Council of Chairs rep. I lead a very fine team consisting of Michael O'Connor, who is our bird dog for Warren this year. He may be the only person we've had to chase down at Burning Man for his paper. Is Roy here? Roy Scrutter, and Dr. Margaret Loper, who will be leaving us, and I wanted to acknowledge her and thank her for all of her work on this committee over the years. Okay, Michael, take it away.
Thank you, Brian. Again, this year's ITSEC Fellow has been an active member of the modeling and simulation community since the very beginning. He was an engineer on the SimNet program, which is the foundation from which most of our current M&S technologies originate. Next, he co-founded a very successful company providing M&S tools to the community. And most recently, he has worked with incubator programs and helped innovative startups in the defense business. His contributions to the M&S community are legendary. He's been an advocate for the development and use of open standards for many years. He has given his time to many organizations, including serving as the chair of the Simulation Interoperability Standards Organization Executive Committee. And through a lot of his work, the use of open standards has allowed both large and small businesses to compete in the defense modeling and simulation area and truly created a cooperative environment, a real community. And with that, I've known Warren for nearly 30 years and personally witnessed many of his contributions to the modeling and simulation community. And it is both a great honor and a pleasure to introduce the 2022 ITSEC Fellow, Warren Katz.
Thanks, Mike. It actually does pay to have somebody, a 30-year-long friend, on the fellow committee to help you get over that finish line. Well, thank you all. This is obviously a tremendous honor. I'd like to thank the Fellows Committee and NTSA for providing me this. I'm amazed you guys all remember me after 10 years. I haven't been here in quite a while. My brother, my mother, and my wife all came, which is the first time. My wife's been here once before, but they didn't come here to help me celebrate. They came because I thought I was lying about the whole thing, and they're just double checking that I'm actually doing this. So yes, here I am. In fact, this is happening. My understanding of the Fellows Program is that it is designed to, as Mike said, honor the people who've made some contribution, but also to archive the historical record of what happens so it doesn't get lost to time. I think there's a famous saying about if you don't study history, it repeats itself. So hopefully I'll give you a little bit of a background in how, at least, I got through this and where we are today. I have to hit the down button. Let's see what happens. The presentation is where? Nope. Oh, there we go. Got it. All right, excellent. Very good, very good. Okay, I'm going to go through the first 23 years of my life in 2 slides. It should be pretty quick. A lot of people ask me, how did I get into this? How did I get into the modeling and simulation world? I think I'm a good storyteller. This is a pretty good story. For those of you who are about my age, and you're anywhere from 50 to 70, I won't tell you exactly where I am there, you may recall there was a publisher a long time ago, Columbia House, who used to send albums and tapes to your house, and if you didn't cancel your subscription, they would like start billing you. So the obligation was on you to cancel your subscription to whatever the thing is they were sending you. So at the age of 10, I started getting the World of Automobiles, an encyclopedia of automotive technology. And we weren't very wealthy when I was younger, so this was my prized possession. I had 2 of these. They sent me 2 volumes before they stopped sending it to me. So I got A through B something or other. And I studied them end to end. These are my 2 prized possessions, these 2 first versions of the encyclopedia. And one of the articles in this encyclopedia of automotive technology was for something called the continuously variable ratio transmission. For anybody who's a mechanical engineer, well, if anybody who owns a car, your car has a 5-speed, 6-speed, 7-speed transmission. But there is a thing, and it was invented in the 1940s or 50s, called a continuously variable ratio transmission. And it has, as you can see on the right, belts and pulleys. And when the pulleys contract, the belt rides up higher on the pulley or shallower on the pulley, changes the radius of one pulley to another pulley. Continuously variable ratio transmission. I was fascinated by this device. And I thought to myself, well, why isn't this in every car today? My father had a car, a 1971 Chrysler New Yorker. There's a bunch of other stories associated with that car. My brother's nodding his head. But we had a 3-speed, transmission. So as a little kid, I was a nerdy little kid. As a little kid, I became fascinated by this device, and I was appalled by the fact that every car did not have one in it yet. So at the ripe old age of 10 or so, I decided to become a mechanical engineer and to figure out and perfect and design a better version of this continuously variable ratio transmission. On the left is the front cover of my bachelor's thesis from MIT, which was 12 years later, which was the design of a continuously variable ratio transmission, a picture in the middle of my design from my bachelor's thesis. And the very last picture is a schematic diagram of the transmission from a Bradley M2 fighting vehicle, which coincidentally enough happens to be the exact same kind of weirdo continuously variable ratio transmission. So from age 10 through age 23, I was obsessed with this thing. And at age 23, I started interviewing jobs. I thought for sure I'd work for Ford or GM or something in Detroit. But it turns out this defense contractor in Cambridge had a simulation system that they were writing simulation code for all these military vehicles, and the Bradley M2 was one of them. And they needed somebody who was an expertise in this weird, strange, niche-y transmission. So it was a very unusual confluence of events. You've all heard a million stories about the SimNet system, about the beginnings of that program and all its contributions. So I started in SimNet, my first job out of college in '87, as a drivetrain modeler, writing simulation code for various tanks and ground vehicles and whatnot. And then I went on and moved on to air vehicles. At some point, maybe a year and a half in, I was given my own project, this thing called the Stealth Viewer, which I'm guessing everybody's seen a variation of by this point in their careers. That was my project sitting right there. On the left is Jack Thorpe. I think only I don't know Jack. And on the right is Jimmy Shiflett. And the thing in the middle was my very first project of my own, which was this out-the-window viewer that could fly around anywhere on the battlefield and see what was going on. Now, because I did that, I got familiarity with Jack and Jimmy and understood how to deal with customers and understood what they wanted. So I became a little more than an engineer, project leader at the ripe old age of 25-ish or so. But my very last project at BBN was a dismounted infantry trainer. That occurred in about 1990, delivered that, and then my career at BBN was coming to an end. And to add a little color of what was happening there, BBN's business model was the cost plus fixed fee contracting model. They contracted with DARPA, they sold their time, they made their 8% profit on top of their time, And these were some pretty brilliant scientists who, in my opinion, were completely wasting their efforts. It's like, how can you just sell your time and get 8% profit? You're inventing amazing things, and you're not recouping any money off of it. So it was right at that time that I decided this is not a good business model. When I first got there, age 23, I took one look and I was like, this is horrible. Why don't you become a product company and sell your intellectual property for many times what it costs to make? But they were not really interested. It was risky for them. They thought, we'll just go back to DARPA and get another contract, and we'll have no gaps, and we'll never have to have anybody sitting around. We'll never have to invent anything on our own dollar. Never have to take any risk. Not really a business model that interested me even at that age. So I decided that I wanted to be in the product business immediately, and I did 3 years at BBN. It was a great time. Every rumor that you've heard about it is true. It was an amazing place to work, but business-wise, it was pretty much a dead end. It turns out that I was a bit prescient as a young kid. The investor community doesn't like the labor model either, and I will talk a little bit more about that on this next slide. For those of you involved in buying and selling companies, valuing companies on Wall Street, determining how much they're worth, in the aerospace business, for cost plus fixed fee type of labor contractors, a company is usually worth between 8 and 12 times their trailing 12 months earnings, or 1 to 2 times their gross revenue. That's a pretty much a standard for the aerospace industry. So if you have a little company, a $10 million company, $10 million in gross revenue, and you're making $1 million in profit, you would think that's a great little company, and it is. It is a great little company for the founder, but if you're going to exit that company, sell it or go public, that company is really only worth about $10 to $15 million, okay? Now, a product company, on the other hand, especially something like a business-to-business software as a service company, you've probably heard a lot about B2B SaaS, those companies are usually worth between 10 and 15 times forward gross revenue projection, okay? So if I have a $10 million company that's losing money, that's not profitable, but yet I'm projecting my revenue for the next year to be $20 million, let's say, that company is worth in the hundreds, okay? It's worth $150 to $300 million, okay, depending on time of year. Things are a little dampened right now. Venture community has pulled back a little bit, but still you can see that for an investor or an entrepreneur, you don't want to be in the labor business. You don't want to be in the aerospace business. You'd like to be in the software as a service or any kind of product business. So this was, and of course, if you go to venture capitalists with a business plan, a company idea, if you're intending to be a labor contractor, you're done. You won't raise a penny of money. You'll have to earn your way out of the basement, kind of like we did. So, product company, good. Service company, not so good. Does everybody understand? I'll ask questions later, but it's this comes back into play many times throughout the remainder of my presentation. So it's very, very important to understand that, this valuation discrepancy in different kinds of companies. So in 1990, my friend John Morrison and I left BBN and we formed Mach Technologies. Our first idea was not in the simulation community. The idea that we came up with at first was to write a Macintosh emulator that would run on PCs. The Apple Macintosh was going great guns, but still everybody had PCs. So we figured we could write the software to run Apple's Macintosh software on a PC. It would run slowly, but it would be an interoperability or compatibility play. So we started the company. We were pretty naive at the time in growing, building, starting a company. So we each took $6,000 out of our pocket. We bought a Sun Spark Station, I believe, and a printer, and then paid our health insurance. And then day 2 of the money, we had zero money in the bank. We were finished, done. Fortunately, we were in the basement of my house in Cambridge, so we didn't have any rent. But if anybody's thinking about starting a company, don't start a company like this. This is not the way to start a company, okay? Come to me, I'll advise you a little better now. I have a little more insight on how to do this correctly. So what we did start to do, because BBN was the only game in town when it came to distributed simulation, and the DoD was beginning to developed the DIS standard, and it was going to obviously become a big thing in the industry. John and I became the only wild cards available on the market who had technical expertise in this area. So we started getting pinged a lot by larger defense contractors for our knowledge. We were once again kind of naive about this, and so every time anybody would sit down and interview us, we'd tell them everything they wanted to know, which was actually a pretty stupid thing to do. Don't ever do that. Don't ever tell somebody everything they ever want to know. You want to keep stuff back so they still need you. I remember Bob Beister, the founder of SAIC. He had one of his guys send me a plane ticket, fly me out to San Diego. That guy grilled me for 3 hours, and I told him everything he wanted to know about distributed simulation, who did what on SimNet, and whose job it was to do what, and where the technology was, and whatnot. Dumbest thing I ever did. It was really not a wise move. And it did turn out that the modeling and sim consulting work took over and crowded out our work on this Macintosh emulator, which was actually quite good because 2 or 3 other companies were making a Macintosh emulator, and they got sued out of existence by Apple, literally sued into nothingness for trying to run Apple software on a PC. So dumb luck. And by the way, in business, dumb luck is, it's the number one thing you hope and pray for is dumb luck. So this seemed to work out pretty well for us. So at the time, we were like, all right, this modeling and sim stuff is, run with the stream. This is what was pulling us in the right direction. It was pretty clear that we still wanted to be in the commercial products business. We had no intent on being cost plus fixed fee contractors for our whole existence. So we immediately came up with a plan to go into the commercial product business in the modeling and sim space. And the very, very most obvious first proximal product was a networking toolkit that could implement this new DIS protocol that was just coming out. So we found out about the SBIR program. We got the big phone books. Today you just get online and you can type in the search words and get all the RFPs for SBIRs. But back then they literally mailed you a physical phone book, and you had to thumb through it by hand and use a highlighter pen and find the solicitation topics that you would bid on. So we wound up bidding on A91-254, which was A is for Army, 91 is for 1991, and 254 was the 254th solicitation for the Army for that year. And it was essentially for the VR-Link toolkit that most of you know and use today. Our Kotar, the guy on the right, great guy. His name was Admiral Piper. Worked at Stricom at the time. He's unfortunately deceased now, but he came to visit us in Cambridge at our office, and he said, he knew it. He said, this is exactly what the industry needs right now. We need a commercial product toolkit because this DIS thing is coming on strong. We need something that can be sold to everybody in the industry. Otherwise, everybody's going to be reinventing the wheel. So we did it. Our first sale came about 9 months after we awarded our Phase 1 contract. Now, back in those days, Phase 1 was $50,000, and of course, everybody who bid an SBIR would bid at $49,952.17. That's how you'd bid all your SBIRs, a few cents less than the cap. So our Phase 1 SBIR, I believe, was $49,452.17, something like that. But my partner, John, who is an outstanding computer scientist, he just grabbed the contract, ran into the corner, and about 9 months later had an MVP. And at that time, nobody really knew what an MVP was. That concept came on much later with agile development, but it's a minimally viable product, is the bare bones minimal product that you can sell to a customer or give to a customer, that you're not humiliated, that it's slightly better than what the customer is using today. That's what an MVP is. And the talent and skill of developing products today, software and hardware world, is to get to your MVP with as little money and time as possible, get your product into the hands of your customer as quickly as possible, and then start gathering feedback. Okay, and I'll talk a little bit more about how this relates to the JSIDS process, which I think you're all familiar with, which is literally the exact opposite. JSIDS process is, let's form a committee and fantasize about every possible feature this thing could have, throw it in this garbage pail, gold plate it all, and then bid it out, which is, by the standards of the commercial product world, is the exact wrong thing to do. So we came out with an MVP 9 months later. It's still the most widely used DIS and now HLA networking toolkit in existence. So I'm quite proud of it. It was launched 30 years ago. Just a little over 30 years ago. First customer was Nusk, I believe it was, or Newick in Newport, Rhode Island. I remember the guy, Jim Sheehy. I remember the phone call that he called me up. I don't know how he even got my phone number. He called us up and he said, I heard a rumor you have a DIS toolkit that you sell. Is that true? The whole idea of a commercial product that one company might sell to the other in defense space was like, a weird thing. So I said, yeah, we do sell this. We just came out with it. It's, the MVP is, the ink's still wet, but yes, it's done and ready for sale. And he's like, well, how much is it? I'm like, how about $2,000? And he's like, no, $2,000? And I thought he was like complaining that it was too expensive. And he was very suspicious that we would sell something for as cheap as $2,000. We later raised our price a little bit, but not much. But that was the origin story of VR Link. Now, I want to mention one other little thing here. Some of you may have been involved or heard about the recent SBIR reauthorization process that went through Congress. That it did in fact get reauthorized December 29th and a half. It was expiring September 30th. It was reauthorized a few hours before it was going to expire. I was in the middle of that negotiation between the majority and minority staff on how to reauthorize, what features should be in it. And one of the arguments, you've all no doubt heard of the pejorative title of Cybermill. Cybermill is a company that does SBIRs over and over and over again, never commercializes anything. So I was against those people, and those people are trying to make the program as amenable as possible for Cybermills. So those are the two factions that were fighting. One of the arguments that they were using is that sometimes companies do need hundreds of millions of dollars before their technology is mature enough to actually sell as a commercial product. But here on the other side of the spectrum, under a $49,000 phase one, we came out with our product, which and I remember when we won the phase two for this, it was $500,000. We literally didn't know what to do with the money. We were looking at each other like, $500,000 it just gave us for a phase two and the product is finished? We finished it in phase one. We of course, got together and figured out how to spend the money. We spent it and we augmented the product. But that was the story of VR Link. So no, you don't need a huge amount of money to prototype a commercial off-the-shelf product. You can get it out pretty cheap. So now we started selling VR Link. And one of the things I started noticing is that the biggest customers who had the biggest budgets in modeling and simulation were not buying the product. Every time they had a make-buy decision, they would choose to make themselves not buy. And I would go through the litany of logical reasons why they should buy it from me and not make it themselves. And it was like talking to a wall. I didn't quite understand why I was losing. Any small program, let's say under $10 million that needed the stuff, they would buy immediately. The greatest customers, they were happy, they had no problem. But every program that was over $100 million, I could never talk them into buying. And it actually happened several times at ITSEC. At the Rosen Center at 2 o'clock in the morning over the 7th Bourbon, a program manager from Stricom at the time would say, Warren, you're beating your head against the wall. Of course your product does what we need it to do. Of course it's cheaper than what we can do ourselves. Of course it's ready today, commercial line. We don't have to waste the time. But we're paid to make stuff. Both the government side program managers who are paid to run large programs and their contractors have no incentive at all to save money and time. And so I was bringing them, the anathema to their greatest wishes. And as a 27 or 8-year-old kid at the time, I was baffled that this could possibly be true in the defense acquisition world at that time. That this dystopian reality that better, faster, cheaper was punishing my customers and they wouldn't buy was inexplicable. So of course I thought, okay, I need to go fix this. I need to go find one 4-star general somewhere and just tell him this, and he'll fix it all. Okay. All I have to do is reveal this dynamic and explain what's going on, and it'll all be fixed. as soon as I get the word out. Well, it wasn't quite so easy. This is now 30 some odd years later, and I'm still waging this battle, which I'll describe in a little more detail later. But most engineers don't have this innate sales psychology understanding. And I took a sales psychology course around about 2000, I think it was 1999, 2000. And I learned this thing which threw my world upside down, which was all decisions that people make are emotional. They make the decision first, and then they go find the facts and figures necessary to rationalize the emotional decision they already came to. Okay, so logic doesn't really have much to do with it. You have to find out what people's emotional bias is first, and then figure out how to manipulate that. Don't use logic. Don't beat your customers to death with logic. Mathematical proofs, I found, just didn't work. And the corollary to that is the second line below, is that when you have incentives that are misaligned with written directive and policy, the incentives wind up getting satisfied, not the policy. Okay, so the other way I like to say it, as soon as you make a system idiot-proof, somebody goes and invents a better idiot. Okay, somebody will figure their way around a set of rules if it conflicts with their enlightened self-interest. All right, not a pleasant lesson for a young engineer to learn. Young engineer would think that logic and prove mathematical proofs, and eventually you can force the other person to capitulate if you beat them to death with enough logic and facts and whatever. It just doesn't work that way. So at that time, this is around 2000-ish time frame, I became a little Clarence Darrow. I started becoming a little lawyer myself and digging and digging and digging. And I found out that the law was on my side. Whenever somebody was said, you know what, your product is just fine, but I prefer to make my own. Okay, it turns out that that's illegal. It's a violation of this law that was put in place in 1994 called FASA, Federal Acquisition Streamlining Act. And some of you may have heard of a thing called the Perry Memo that came out at the same time with Defense Secretary William Perry, who came out with a very, very short, pithy note that said, I want the DoD to buy commercial items instead of developmental items, every single possibility that you can. That was the edict. This was the law. It's not ambiguous, and there isn't much wiggle room if you read it. And the first step before you specify some large developmental program is to do market research. You must do market research on what is available commercially before you design a new developmental program. And if you find something that's even close, no commercial item will meet every fantasy wish list requirement that somebody stuffs in a JSIDS type process. If you find anything close, you're supposed to do two things. One is you're supposed to negotiate with the vendor to add those features, see if they'll do it. And if the vendor says no, if for some reason they're impractical, you're supposed to go back to your requirements and remove those things, if it's at all possible. This is written black and white in the law. These are the two things that have to happen if you find something even close. So I was like, eureka, I have a law now backing me up. Now I just have to go, beat everybody over the head with a club with this law, and all of a sudden I'll get my way. It also didn't happen, okay? Bias is, unfortunately, the enlightened self-interest incentives in our industry are still grossly in the make direction, not in the buy direction, okay? But this was law number one that said the exact opposite. And I'm guessing Congress thinks or thought that everybody would just obey it. But again, when your incentives conflict with written legislation, incentives get satisfied, not the legislation. Same thing for interoperability standards, which are near and dear to my heart. DIS is an open interoperability standard, or what's called a voluntary consensus standard. That's a very, very specific legal term, a voluntary consensus standard. And voluntary consensus standards are made by voluntary consensus standards organizations. Organizations that qualify are CISO, IEEE, ANSI, SAE, and they all have these same qualities. Openness, you have to invite everybody in, you have to Your committees all have to have balanced different constituencies on them. You have to have a written due process where everybody's complaints can get registered. You use consensus, not unanimity. It doesn't have to be 100% vote on everything. So this winds up being a little democracy for development of these open interoperability standards. And one can easily understand why this is. Because if one company controls a standard, they will always have all their competitors be huffing and puffing up the rear to comply with it. So this type of structure distributes control of the interoperability standard amongst a large number of constituencies so that no one organization can dominate it. And this is how DIS went through CISO, IEEE went through CISO. Your USB ports on the side of your computers all use the same principle of a voluntary consensus standard. Now this is a law as well, passed in 1995, National Technology Transfer Act. It was further refined actually the congressman today, we're talking about the Office of Management Budget circulars. This is further refined in Circular OMB 119, and it's also pretty unambiguous, which says if there is a voluntary consensus standard that exists that satisfies even close to your needs, you're supposed to use it. Okay, you can send people there, you can add features to it, you can do whatever you like, but you can't use a proprietary standard if an open standard exists, and you can't make a new one if an open standard exists. Okay, so great. Now I had two things on my side. The DIS standard was an open consensus standard with CISO, and I was selling VR-Link, and theoretically, people were supposed to buy it if a commercial item exists, and it did, and didn't help. None of this helped. So what started to happen was I started learning. I started learning what who all the factions were, where they sat, what their interests were, why we were not succeeding. And clearly on one side, there were champions who wanted this to happen, wanted this transformation to happen, and they were Congress, the very highest level of DoD policymakers at OSD. Obviously, the commercial vendors wanted this to happen. They would like the customers to be compelled to buy instead of make. And the end user customers, they didn't want to wait 5 extra years, 10 extra years for their system. They would rather have it quickly, enabled through commercial items. Taxpayer, VR-Link, as I said, was the runtime licenses, I think, in bulk were $1,900, okay? But every time a large program would go to replicate a DIS interface, it would have a $5 to $10 million developmental bill attached to it, okay? So you would think the taxpayers would be like, I don't want you reinventing the wheel every time. Buy the commercial thing. And that is what they want. But on the other side, however, who is it that benefits by reinventing the wheel? Well, it's the program managers on the government side, government employees who now have the ability to run a 10, 20-year-long program. It's job security. It's credibility. You have a high budget, a very, very large budget. You get gravitas from running a very high-budget program. The contractors who are making their 8% profit, they would much rather make than buy, because 8% on a $1,900 runtime license is not the same as 8% on a $10 million developmental item. So this did not go very well. And even worse, very, very last item, some government organizations wanted to go into the product business themselves by having what's called a government off-the-shelf product, which is a competing product, which the government hands out for nothing inside the enterprise. They have a huge developmental budget, but they hand out the product for nothing. So it winds up being a freely dumped product into the marketplace. So this is right about the mid to late 90s. But what started happening was there were a bunch of small programs like, look, I have a $4 million budget. That's all I have. I can't pay anybody to reinvent the wheel. I can't pay anybody to remake this stuff. So what I'm going to do is buy whatever I need and cobble something together and get my little job done. And very often these were laboratory customers who were putting together a little simulation laboratory, just didn't have the money to reinvent the wheel. They'd buy a couple of SGI machines, they'd buy stuff from Mach, and there's a bunch of other companies at that time. Late 80s, the first company was actually probably Multigen. Multigen came out with the product was called Multigen. The company was called Software Systems. It wasn't even called Multigen at the time. Changed their name later. a bunch of other companies came out with great little commercial items at the time, so people could do their job. They could actually cobble together a simulation system from these pieces. So the egg was cracked, and there was no putting the genie back in that bottle. You could get something done without a humongous developmental program, and word got out. Standards started emerging, so all these products could be clicked together pretty painlessly. DIS was the first, then HLA came later. A great example that I use in the paper that I wrote is SIGI. Some of you who are familiar with image generator technology know that this SIGI standard was actually invented by Boeing and then handed out for free to CISO. It was donated to CISO so it could become an open interoperability standard. Boeing didn't want proprietary rights anymore because what they wanted was the industry to become comfortable that they can adopt this SIGI standard and sell to anybody. Because up until that point, integration of an image generator into a simulation took months and months and months. Because every IG maker, the early ones, Evans and Sutherland, CAE, I think ReadyFusion had one, they all had their own proprietary image generator interface standards. It would take months for an integrator to integrate it all together. So SIGI, and so Boeing did this because they wanted their lives to be easier. They wanted the integration cost for their simulators to be easier. So it was worth it for them to donate it, all the intellectual property rights donated to CISO, and so CISO could make it an open standard. And today, if you walk down the show floor, you'll find 25 image generator companies that all are SIGI compliant. And now, all of a sudden, integration of a simulator is a lot cheaper, a lot faster and cheaper. So a great case study on and Boeing was just a customer. They were just going to be a customer of image generators. They decided strategically they didn't want to be in the image generator business themselves, but they did want to buy them from other people, get competition, head-to-head competition amongst image generators to be more fluid, be able to interchange them more easily. It worked. It worked exactly as Boeing had planned. There's a bunch of later interoperability standards. The few I mentioned there, MSDL, CBML, and C2 SIM, are all for scenario files for CGFs, computer-generated forces, whether it's VR forces, OneSAF sort of thing. Also very, very useful. Okay? So there was no way that the industry could contain this viral change at that point, because there were people who had not a lot of money that needed simulation systems, and they could actually do it. So at this point, it's very, very important to recognize Silicon Graphics in here. I mean, aside from their monstrous parties they used to have at ITSEC, which I went to, most of the people in this room probably went to a Silicon Graphics party at some time or another. They were the first real company to make commercial off-the-shelf IGs. Now, they weren't cheap. That Onyx in the back was probably $1 million. The tall one, the shorter one up front was probably $500,000. But they were coming off an assembly line, and they wanted to sell as many of them as possible. In order to sell those IGs, they needed software products from software companies. So they threw around a lot of money to little companies like Mach and Presagius. It was before Presagius, it was Paradigm and Multigen, Corypheus, in order to stimulate the software side of the equation so they could sell more hardware. I don't know, many of you may remember, or Mach, actually we didn't have our own booth at ITSEC in the early 90s. We were part of Silicon Graphics booth. We wouldn't have had a presence at ITSEC if it wasn't for Silicon Graphics letting us in their booth. So I have to say that SGI was probably one of the most influential forces in commercialization of this industry, simply because they had the hardware, they wanted the software, they invested a lot in the ecosystem. So it's important to recognize their contribution. So how, given all these laws and legislation that I pointed to, and every time I pointed out to anybody, they would think I was lying to them. No, this FASA thing and NTTAA don't exist. I don't have to do it. Nobody checks on me. So really, the way that large programs got around this, and again, incentives are everything. So if you ask somebody who's going to run a $1 billion program, do you want to run a $1 billion program for the next 20 years, or would you like to buy $100 million of COTS product and be done in 90 days? Okay? Unfortunately, the answer is predetermined. Okay? Then they start going and gathering the facts and figures necessary to come to that predetermined answer. All right? So tactic number one was just simply ignore it. Nobody's going to check. whether we did market research. Everybody in our command is on the same page as far as having some big developmental program. It means thousands of jobs for our command, thousands of jobs for our contractors outside our front gate. And it's true, nobody did bother checking, and there was no enforcement of whether anybody ever did any market research. That was one technique. Another technique for more high-profile programs that somebody might actually check to see whether you did your market research was to do the market research, but do it disingenuously. Go look up, the few companies, put together a massive list of features that the COTS product don't have, okay? And then do a checklist. Okay, well, this product doesn't have these, 25% of these features. The other product doesn't have these, 35% of these features. And come to the conclusion that no COTS product meets all of our needs, okay? Well, that's kind of what happened for many, many, many years. And it didn't seem to be much recourse. And the two parts of FASA that were supposed to be legally performed were never performed. Go ask the vendor whether they would put in the missing features. I myself was directly involved with the OneSAF response at Mach. This was in 2000. And they handed us this huge spreadsheet and asked us which features we comply with. We handed them back that same huge spreadsheet with maybe 60% of all of their features checked off. But then we never heard from them again. They never came back to us to ask us whether we would put in the other 40%. They also never, of course, went back to their own requirements process to cut out that 40% that probably wasn't necessary. Same thing with open interoperability standards. Closed proprietary standards, government side closed proprietary standards seem to be the way of the world, and nobody was checking. There was no cop that was checking to see whether there was an open interoperability standard. Now, DIMSO for a while had this very strict HLA policy, which was awesome. Sue was involved with that. That was great, because every program had to prove that they were using HLA or their funding would get cut off at a certain date. That was wonderful. But unfortunately, it got watered down some number of years later, and nobody was enforcing it. So over the years, I said that the genie was out of the bottle, the egg was cracked, commercial items were on the rise, which was all great. But then all of a sudden, a couple of pretty damaging things happened in the industry. The most damaging was OneSAF. I'm guessing most everybody in the room has heard of OneSAF. Despite the fact that there were 3 commercial vendors at the time, and we all responded to the questionnaires that at the time Stricom put together, and of course none of us could comply with the never-ending wish list of features that they wanted in the product. They simply went ahead and started this development program and essentially dumped a product into the marketplace, and I believe they still do that to this day for nothing, when there's still probably now 4 or 5 different commercial vendors that are trying to sell product to these customers in the same marketplace. So it's very hard to rewind time and say, well, what if? But in my estimation, these are very rough numbers, I think the OneSAF program has probably consumed about $1 billion today. I know the very first contract in 1990 was for $300 million for a 5-year contract. It's now 22 years later. I think there was a second contract for $300 million. I'm pretty sure we're in the ballpark of $1 billion. That would have translated to about $200 million of COTS product sales if you divided up amongst all of the vendors that sold those products. And Mach was one. We had VR Forces. This probably cost Mach over 22 years, probably $5 million a year, $10 million a year. But if you look at how the taxpayer and the warfighter were treated, so the taxpayer, in my view, got cheated out of about $800 million. The warfighter, as I recall, the first version of OneSAF was available in 2007. So it took 7 years to issue. It was supposed to be out in 2005. It was a 5-year development program, but they were 2 years late. Okay, had they purchased one of the COTS products, which I don't advise, and I'll talk about that in a second, if they had purchased any one of the COTS products, they would have had something to ship in 2000, 7 years earlier. So the A-B comparison is $200 million of COTS product sales versus $1 billion in a government program, and getting a product 7 years earlier. Okay, and I can attest to the fact that $1 spent on a government program, let me reverse that, $1 spent inside a commercial product company probably goes about as far as $4 or $5 spent on a government developmental program. There's not as much bureaucracy. We're making our people work a lot smarter, a lot more efficiently. It probably is a 4 or 5 to 1 exchange ratio. So I believe that the community was heavily damaged by this activity, which, from what I understand, still goes on today. Not too far behind that horrible incident was the TINA incident. TINA, Test and Training Enabling Architecture. I think it used to be called Test and Evaluation Enabling Architecture, and they changed its name at some point. Same kind of thing, but they completely ignored the fact that HLA existed. And at first, the claim out of the TINA program was, we're just going to build on top of HLA. We'll be HLA compliant. We'll just add a few features on top of HLA and come out with an augmented version. It was a ruse. There is no HLA in TINA today. It's all been discarded. And the fact that there is an open standard HLA that exists today that could be used, and that law, that NTTAA law, says that you're supposed to, doesn't matter. There doesn't seem to be a cop around when you need one in this particular case as well. So again, rough numbers, I believe TINA consumed in the order of $1 billion. It wasn't quite as damaging as OneSAF, because OneSAF was dumping product head-to-head in the market against commercial vendors, where TINA essentially just sequestered off the live training range marketplace and made that whole marketplace unavailable to COTS vendors. Okay, so it removed a lot of money from the marketplace. Again, probably $200 million of lost sales to vendors, which I would have liked, I would have appreciated, and about $800 million of taxpayer money that they were cheated out of. And I think the product would have been better today if they had been all commercial products. So there were two also slightly less harmful programs. One was called CTIA, which amazingly enough was an exact duplicate of TINA. I don't know how anybody could let that go through in the late 1990s, early 2000s, but unabashedly a knockoff of TINA. I think that got cut pretty quickly, and it didn't absorb all that much money. JSIMS, I'm guessing you all heard of. My predecessor from last year, Fred Hartman, went through a very detailed analysis of JSIMS. The biggest harm was it took down $2 billion of taxpayer money, but it didn't dump a free product in the marketplace, so it wasn't quite as harmful. The end result, however, was a very, very interesting analysis of alternatives study that OSD sponsored, which was a very complicated industry game or business model analysis. One of the end results that came out of that game was this novel, brilliant, unorthodox idea called a commercial free product marketplace, where you might have a bunch of products that were interoperable that you could actually buy from vendors. It was so novel that they hired RAND and paid them a few $1 million to do an analysis on whether free market capitalism was a good system or not. And sure enough, RAND came out with this brilliant report. It's like 300 pages long about how this version of free market capitalism actually worked quite well in the training simulation community. So overall, I'd say JSIMS didn't do as much damage as the rest and actually came out with an interesting result. But now if you put yourself in the shoes of a commercial product vendor, you're now put in a very, very uncomfortable position. Do I protest an organization that may in fact be my customer in other places? It's very tough. It's a very, very tough rock and a hard place you put a vendor in. Open interoperability standards, never even heard of anybody doing a GAO protest on that basis. But again, very expensive, and there's no question whether you'd win or not, and you're certainly going to irritate an organization that might be a big customer of yours in the future. So this situation was kind of depressing up until about 2014, when a beautiful white-hot spotlight got shown on this particular dynamic, this particular problem. You all might have heard of the Digital Common Ground Station, -A, which is for the Army. This was a big program. The first version that was a $3 billion expenditure that didn't really work very well. And in 2014, the Army was bidding out the next generation of it. And this company called Palantir had a COTS product that did pretty much what the Army wanted them to do, wanted the end system to do. And so the Army issued an RFI for information. Palantir provided them all of the documentation on their Gotham platform, which was their commercial product, and the Army pretty much ignored it, ignored they ever received anything, and made the presumption that they can and should go ahead with a developmental program, start from scratch, paying a contractor from a clean sheet of paper to rebuild a new product. Palantir, very deep, Peter Thiel was one of their main investors, very deep pockets. They were like, nah, sorry. No, you're not going to get away with this. So they filed the GAO protest, which was dismissed. But they did not stop there. You can actually, if you disagree with the GAO protest, you can actually sue. And they did. They sued the Army over this failure to perform honest, fair market research, and they won. Okay? The first time, they claim they were the first person to ever bring such a lawsuit, such a protest for violation of FASA. They were not. I actually did in 2005 for the OneSAF distribution contract. And unfortunately, thank you. Unfortunately, I lost, and I stopped at the GAO. The GAO dismissed my protest. A couple of very interesting lessons I learned there. I think I'll talk about that on the next page. But Palantir won. And because I'm the ITSEC fellow, I'm going to read this paragraph because it's just so pleasurable to read this one paragraph. The Army's failure to conduct a proper 10 U.S.C. 2377 evaluation was so plainly unjustified as to lack a rational basis. Savantage Financial Services, Inc. versus United States. Without a doubt, there are circumstances in which it is clear that a commercial alternative offered by a prospective commercial bidder is not suitable for procurement. The overwhelming evidence in the administrative record in this protest, however, demonstrates that the Army was on notice of a realistic, possible, commercially available alternative product, placing the onus on the Army to more fully consider the potential commercial options suggested before pursuing a developmental-only approach to the procurement. The Army did not do so and therefore acted arbitrarily and capriciously in a violation of 10 U.S.C. 2377 by neglecting to fully investigate possible commercially available alternatives to meet the requirements of the Army acquisition. So, and then the Army appealed the decision and lost, okay? So the Army was required to retract or withdraw. I think I have the next page. Okay. The Army was forced to retract that solicitation, and 2 years later came out with a solicitation for, they didn't just award it to Palantir, they came out with a solicitation for the purchase of a commercial item that met their needs. Palantir did win, that was in 2019, but that still wound up being between 2 to 4 years faster overall than if they had engaged in the developmental program. Okay, so this is a clear A-B comparison of what would happen if you went with a commercial item. Never happened before, but now this set a precedent for any other commercial vendor in the United States that sees this coming, okay? And unfortunately, this happened 16 years after OneSAF came out and 11 years after I filed my failing GAO protest. So this is a very, very important lesson I learned at the time, that Palantir came out. I don't know this guy. This is the guy who won the lawsuit. This is the lawyer that won both the SpaceX lawsuit against the Air Force and NASA for not buying commercial items, commercial launch or payload capability from SpaceX, and he also won the lawsuit for Palantir. So I mentioned that in 2005, I protested the OneSAF distribution contract. I did a bunch of stupid business things. One, I did not hire a lawyer at all. I figured I could do it myself. So I wrote up this huge GAO protest document and submitted to GAO. They must have been laughing. They must have been guffawing in laughter on the floor reading my GAO protest. And of course, I lost. So lesson number one is hire a good lawyer. And this guy's a good lawyer. He doesn't know me. He doesn't know that I put his picture in the slide. But, you know, is worth his weight in gold, in my opinion. Okay, if you call him, you can tell him I sent you. He won't know who I am. So Congress. So I kept going up and up and up and up the ladder. Congress is actually well aware of this exact dynamic and this exact problem, and is on the side of the commercial vendor. And I'll talk a little bit more about what I'm doing today with my congressional activities, but it's working. It's going pretty well. Inside the DoD, you've heard of AFWERX, you've heard of DIU. They get it too. They get it. DIU does nothing but buy commercial items. AFWERX is grooming companies through the new Air Force's new SBIR program to be commercial vendors into the Air Force, and it's pretty exciting. So this doesn't all have to be Congress pushing this down. The DoD internally can and is doing it, doing this themselves. The humiliation point is a concept I invented. So sadly, this slide is 27 years old and actually predates PowerPoint. Silicon Graphics had a version of PowerPoint on their multi-million-dollar, Onyxes, and I made the first version of the slide probably in 1995-ish or so. And what this denotes is, for some large DoD programs, you do have to pay cost plus fixed fee because they just don't exist at all. You must. Even that I'm starting to soften a little bit on, because everything inside of an aircraft carrier, 60% of the stuff inside an aircraft carrier can be bought COTS. Okay, just the hull. Only thing that you can't buy off the shelf is the hull. There's so much inside of it as you can. So everything on the left represents things that classically have been cost plus fixed fee type contracts. The yellow area are the things that different parts of the DoD are trying to push into commercial markets, trying to intentionally make commercial products out of them. And the blue on the right, far right, are things that succeed in becoming commercial items, okay? Now, the part in red, these are those programs that ignore this transition and also ignore the very existence of commercial items and replicate them. And this is representative of how much waste there is there. And the sharp line on the right where I point to the humiliation point, I define this term to be the point where it's too humiliating to ask for cost plus fixed fee money to redevelop this thing that is obviously available off the shelf. Like asking for $1 billion to rewrite Microsoft Word because a few of the boxes are not in the right place. That would be humiliating. It still happens. I think the DoD developed a travel system that they could have used Orbitz, they could have used any one of a number of commercial. They spent I think $750 million on an airline reservation system, which was thrown entirely in the trash. So it still happens. Yet this humiliation point keeps moving further and further to the right as time goes on, which is wonderful. But still, there's still programs that get away with, getting away with producing a cost plus fixed fee type developmental program that's really inappropriate. So this is my most important slide of the day. It's not a very attractive slide, but it represents my 30 years of learning about the nature of this problem and how to fix it. So many of these presentations I've made over the years, and so many presentations I've heard from four-star generals, from OSD officials, about we must change our culture. We have to change our culture. Our culture can't survive. Our culture is horrible. Our culture's got to move, got to change. Yet there's always been a conspicuous absence of a step-by-step checklist or process to actually change the culture. Well, this is that. So this is a step-by-step instruction manual of exactly how to change DoD acquisition culture. And obviously, it all revolves around altering the incentive structures such that the bias is strongly towards buy and not make anymore. And if anybody in this room is in charge of creating, monitoring, incentive structures of anybody in DoD acquisition, okay, I don't want to hear anything anymore about cultural change until after you've tried this and failed, because this is it. This is the Rosetta Stone. This is the path, okay, to get that done. Number one, the career rewards for people making the decision have to be so overwhelmingly biased towards buy that it would be horrible anathema to their career if they got stuck in a developmental program. Today, it's actually the exact opposite. Okay, so if somebody finds that COTS product, they should get a promotion, a humongous bonus, the next job, whatever it is. That has to be their incentive. So they're looking for every reason not to come up with a developmental program and every reason to dig and dig and dig until they find that commercial item. Once the damage is done and a developmental program starts, you can reward the program managers for bringing it in under budget. Okay, if you bring something in on time and on budget, you should get nothing. Okay, but if you bring it in under budget and faster than originally scheduled, then a big reward should ensue. Okay, and that incentivizes everybody to dig while the program is running for commercial alternatives and substitute them in for chunks of custom development. So under budget faster. One of the critiques I've heard of this is, a great story. This is an awesome story, okay? I lost the OneSAF, COTS versus GOTS fight in about 2000. A year later, I said, you know what, let me call the OneSAF program office and see if I can sell them a VR link. Okay, it's the DIS networking toolkit. They have to do that for OneSAF anyway. Maybe I can give them the deal of the century. I'll sell them VR link to be inside of OneSAF. So I call them up. I get them on a phone call. There was a couple people at the mock side, a few program managers, Stricom, I think it was at the time, Stricom, OneSAF program managers in the room on the other end of the phone. I said, look, I'll give it to you for $1 million, unlimited. It's done, it's finished, it's working. I know you're going to spend $10 million on it. Unlimited license to use as many copies of VR Link inside of OneSAF. 10 cents on the dollar. Okay? The only comment I got back from the other end of the phone was from a junior program manager who asked me, the COTS vendor, will the Army lower our budget for OneSAF if we save all of that money? Okay? And I'm like, I'm the COTS vendor. Why are you asking me this question? And you can clearly hear on the other side of the phone one of the more senior program managers kick the guy under the table or nudged him or something and said, this is the COTS vendor, so they actually can't answer that question. So that's our problem on our side. And I was thinking to myself, this is how depressing that the only thing they can possibly, saving $9 million and saving 5 years of development work is uninteresting to them if they lose that $9 million out of their budget. So this brings me to my next suggestion here, which is you have to let the program manager keep half of their savings to use for elective things, okay? If you do that, then all of a sudden they have some incentive to save money, because if they have now extra money, a slush fund. I know that everybody hates those words, slush fund, but they'll have a slush fund by which to shore up things that are not going well, while at the same time incentivizing them to find cheaper alternatives. So these top things are the key to, in my opinion, to fixing this cultural problem. Now those are the carrots. I believe that these things, big carrots, little sticks. You have to have both. The market research that's not done now and not checked at all must be conducted. First of all, it must be checked. There's no way any program bigger than $100 million should be allowed to proceed unless the market research is performed and verified and validated by independent third party. Furthermore, the market research has to be conducted by somebody who's not going to be rewarded by the execution of a large developmental program. They have an inherent conflict of interest. They cannot be the decision maker on that decision. The contractor, once they get their 8% profit contract, they have to have some incentives as well. The idea that I came up with here, which I'm still pushing with Congress, is that if a contractor finds a commercial item, they can charge double the profit on top of the commercial item, and the labor profit be cut in half to pay for it. That may not be enough. I've heard that actually, if you save 90% of a budgetary item, but you're only doubling the profit, it's not enough. So that may have to be looked at a little harder. The other two ideas, these are actually not new ideas, the bottom two. The concept of a lead system integrator that is conflicted out of being the developer or vendor of any of the submodules. They're only allowed to integrate. Okay, that's interesting too. They'll be incentivized to go find the thing that's already finished, as opposed to, passing through lots of developmental work. And the very last thing is just have proposals weighted on percentage of commercial items, okay, which also doesn't seem to be done today. So this is it. If anybody in the audience here is responsible for anybody's incentives or policy or anything, don't whine anymore about cultural change. This is how to do it. How am I doing on time? Oh, all right. I thought it'd be way short. All right, I'm getting there. Okay, I have to admit that coming back to ITSEC after 10 years, I'm a little disappointed in a couple of things. The interoperability standards evolution has stagnated. It used to be in my day that DIMSO had a big hammer and a budget, and they can make HLA and get people to use it and put mandates in place. It doesn't seem to be that big 800-pound interoperability standards gorilla around these days, which is a shame, because these two interoperability standards I mentioned here should be exist and be in vibrant use in a bunch of new product companies, but they're not. One is a standard interface for physics models. Everybody develops models of aircraft and tanks and whatnot. There does not seem to be an accepted industry-wide interoperability standard for these plug-compatible physics models. The other one is an AI interface. Everybody's screaming and yelling about AI, but yet there's no industry-wide standard for interchange of AI models from different AI vendors, which you can imagine would massively accelerate the development of AI. If you can quickly and easily toss an AI model in the garbage and substitute in somebody else's who made a slight improvement, this would create a vibrant, vibrant ecosystem of interchangeable AI products from companies. So I'm kind of disappointed that nobody has done this or pushed it, and there's no, the JAIC could be a good place to do these AI interface models, but I'm somewhat lamenting a power vacuum here in the interoperability standard space. So that's it for standards. For products and new technologies, here's what I'm seeing, okay? One is, there is a little, I'll be honest, this is a company that went through my TechStars program. I'll talk about that in a second. AI-generated scenarios. Once a simulation ends, it should be pretty easy for an AI to examine the result and then create a new scenario and run it again and again and again and again. There is one company out there on the show floor, Mizbay, that does exactly this. They went through my TechStars program. Their main customers now, hypersonics in the Air Force and Space Force, for doing these continuously repetitive simulation runs all by itself, like the movie War Game. Another technology that I'm pretty excited about, you all may know, maybe not personally, Dr. Roper. You may not know what he is doing now. He's the founder of a new company called ISTARI that is doing what he is calling digital certification, which means certifying a physical engineering object or piece in simulation first before it's manufactured, such that it never has to be tested. You can put it right into the final finished vehicle, and for that particular use case, it is certified 100% digitally. Okay, it turns out that the Formula One world does this daily. Race cars race around the track. By the end of the day, an engineer has designed a new part that has failed. They print it out in the 3D printer. They plug it into the race car, and the race car goes out the next morning racing with the new part. There's no reason why this can't be done. If you think about the statement, someday simulation will get good enough that you can certify parts completely in simulation. Of course, everybody would agree that statement is true. Dr. Roper is just saying that it's already here, and this is what he's doing with his new company, ISTARI. This is another one that I think the industry has not really glommed onto and produced any good results, which is societal simulation. The simulation, social simulation of individual humans and their aggregate, Okay, if you look at the disinformation and misinformation warfare, which is becoming so much more prominent than kinetic warfare, I'm going to drop my junk on your junk, and I'll blow your junk up, and you know, that's warfare. It's not warfare like that anymore. It's TikTok warfare. It's Facebook warfare. It's informational warfare. If we can get our enemy to pick up half our enemy's population to pick up a rock and beat the other half over the head without firing a shot, it's preferable. I haven't really seen any major advancements in this area. It's kind of disappointing because it's so much more important than so many other regimes of simulation at this point. And business-wise, this is the obvious end result of our industry, and I say it's already 75% done. We may be a little more than that. There's very little that needs to be custom developed at this point. If you go to somebody and say, look, I need an F-35 simulator, they'll say, okay, we have a generic flight simulator. We'll tweak the model ourselves on our own nickel, and you'll buy our simulators for them. So it's an entirely commercial purchase, and doesn't even have to be a commercial purchase. You say, look, I'll pay $1,000 an hour for simulation time on a Joint Strike Fighter simulator that you build, Mr. Vendor. I'll just rent from you. I'll send you pilots. I'll guarantee you some minimum number of hours. This is where our industry is going. There's no need for custom development of anything anymore because most everything is made already, or made to the point where the minor bit of customization at the very end is something that the vendor would absorb in exchange for a reasonably large purchase. And you can see this already. Policy-wise, I've beaten this horse to death already. Changing the incentive structures from make to buy, and enforcement of FAR Part 10. DIMSO, unfortunately, it seems to be a shadow of its former self. I think that body should be resurrected with some pretty major milestones. Okay, so that brings us up to 2012. So I sold Mach in 2006. Still on the show floor. You can go visit them. Now owned by Singapore Technologies. I stayed on until 2012. We parted ways. And during that time, my new boss, General John Coburn, 4-star U.S. Army general, retired AMC commander, awesome guy. And when they bought the company, he puts his arm around me and said, son, I was 46 at the time, whatever it was. He said, son, stop doing all this nonsense with this acquisition form. You're just annoying your future customers. Just do whatever they do. Make money. Let's not antagonize anybody. So for a period of about 5 years, I had to do that, bite my tongue and try to engage in the same, but it didn't work out that well. In 2012, I left and became what's called an angel investor. Angel investors are people who take cash out of their own pocket and invest in companies. All of my companies are in the dual-use space, so had both a DoD defense application as well as a civilian application. I had no interest in investing in defense contractors, no interest in cost plus fixed fee business model companies, but the SBIR program was very, very good to Mach. Built the whole company and all of our products in SBIRs. So that's kind of what I specialized in. Until 2017, when this office called AFWorks got stood up. You may have heard the rumors of the 4 famous captains. They used to call them the 4 captains of the apocalypse, and they later changed their name to the 4 great captains. Steve Lauver in the flight suit, next to him Chris Benson. On the floor, the shorter, dark-haired girl, Austin DeLorme, and next to her, Joey Aurora. Those are the 4 captains that met in an officer's training class and came up with this idea for AFWorks. Behind them is Lieutenant Colonel Harden, behind Chris Benson, that you may recognize General Wilson and Dr. Roper. But essentially, Dr. Roper and General Wilson loved the idea these 4 captains came up with. And over the course of a 3-year period, those 4 captains and their colonel wound up taking over the entire $1 billion of Air Force's SBIR money, which was phenomenal. A bunch of things they realized. I'm actually have to accelerate a little bit. Wow. A number of very, very important things they came up with, which is the amount of money that venture capitalists and private industry were putting into research was 5 times at the DoD. The exchange ratio was very much changed from the 1960s and 70s, where the U.S. DoD was investing all of the money. So they realized that they had to the DoD has to leverage private investment and not fight against it and not ignore it. So they created this paradigm in some of their later contracting mechanisms. You may have heard of StratFi, you may have heard of TACFi, where they require venture capital or private industry investment to pair with the government's investment, which is kind of brilliant. They agreed that all of these companies have to remain commercial product companies, otherwise their venture capitalists will have no interest in partnering with the DoD. Very, very critical realization that these guys came to. And VCs actually started warming up to the US Air Force for this reason. You've all heard about the results of AFWERX. It has been a smash success in a number of different areas. Bottom line is 10 times as many companies started applying to the Air Force's SBIR program that did before. And they now have several thousand new contractors who are COTS product vendors with venture capital from venture capitalists who now participate in the SBIR program, matching their commercial money with DoD money. The reason why I mention this all is because I was asked to run the Air Force Accelerator in Boston, and I did for a period of 3 years. I was the managing director of the Air Force Accelerator powered by Techstars. So in that role, I was a venture capitalist, spending Techstars money investing in all of these companies that went through my program. Okay? I did that for 3 cohorts. At that point, the Air Force didn't need an accelerator anymore because they were a success disaster. They were getting so many thousands of proposals that they didn't need anybody. I was the shill. I was the funnel advertising this new version of the Air Force to the regular commercial startup ecosystem. That was my job. Okay? We did a little too well at it. So I left Techstars in 2021, went back to quasi-retirement, but then I was asked by some of the AFWERX folk to set up an industry association to help lobby Congress from the outside for all of these new companies that truly do want to remain commercial product companies, but would also like to sell their products in the same manner to the government. They do not want to be made to become defense contractors. They don't want to do cost-plus fee contracts. They don't want to keep track of timesheets, no DCA audits, nothing. They will sell their COTS products to the government in the same way they sell it to everybody else. And so now I'm the chairman of the Alliance for Commercial Technology and Government. It's a volunteer role. I don't get paid, but I'm effectively a lobbyist. I go to Congress and deal with all their staffers on all of these issues of making it easier for commercial product companies to sell their product into government without becoming defense contractors. The two major successes we've had in the past year or so, one, you may have heard of SBIR reauthorization that came down to the wire September 30th. I was kind of in the middle of that fight. It was a very, I don't have time to go into it in detail, but there was a lot of changes that we successfully got into the legislation for reauthorization that would not have gotten in there had the Alliance not taken a strong position. The second thing, which I'm even more excited about, is in the House Permanent Select Committee on Intelligence's reauthorization bill that passed the House with strong bipartisan support, has a very strong FAR Part 10 market research enforcement clause in it that I helped write. Okay, now it's in conference with the Senate right now, so it's not clear that it will survive. I've now started working the Senate side to make sure that it will survive, but if it does, then all those things I talked about regarding checking the market research first, having unbiased people do the market research, and incentive structures will all start to happen. Okay, I am almost done. We have 9 minutes left. I'll finish this in 3. How's that? Okay. Angel investing is not for the faint of heart. That's what I do. I've made about 80 angel investments if you count the 30 companies that went through my Techstars program. 1 in 10 is a smash success. 5 in 10 go to 0, and 4 in 10 are what we call the living dead. They stubbornly won't die, and they stubbornly won't grow either. So you have to figure out how to get rid of them. I'm going to go through a couple of my more prominent companies. Mesodyne, great little company in Cambridge. They make a thermophotovoltaic electrical generator. It burns fossil fuel, but it has no moving parts. and it shines the infrared heat on a specially designed solar cell that generates electricity. Okay, so no noise, no heat, no friction, no nothing. For its size, it is much more efficient than a regular piston-type generator, and they're expensive right now because the solar cells are expensive, but long-duration drone companies, Soldier Power, these are the first applications they're going after. One of my favorite companies, Clio Robotics, they make a drone. This is a drone, but you would think there's nothing that you can evolve in a drone these days, but Clio made a ducted birotor, which the Air Force has been attempting for 50 years. They couldn't do it. What they did was they made this little drone that has its two propellers inside that counter-rotate, and they have a set of little flaperons that fire out into the airstream very, very fast in order to make it extremely maneuverable and stable. First time anybody's made a stable ducted birotor. The rotors are all enclosed inside, so you can grab the thing with your hand out of the air, and you can't get hurt by the propellers. And also it's 6 inches in diameter. It can go almost anywhere, bang into things, bang into sensitive equipment. So it's for indoor inspection, which they're doing very, very well. They actually have an Army contract now to potentially replace the Black Hornet. Phoenix Tailings, great company in the Boston area. They take toxic waste in the form of what's called bauxite tailings, which are in the United States in abundance. This is a result of aluminum mining, and they decompose it into all constituent elements, which include rare earths. So we have now a domestic source of magnet material taken out of these toxic waste ponds. Target Arm, they make a launch and recovery system for drones where the platform that the drone is being launched and recovered from is on the move. They're up to 65 miles an hour now, so for trucks, cars, military vehicles that are actually driving, they can launch and recover drones at this thing. This is a very old video. The device is much more elegant at this point. Fixed wing and rotary wing. AirShare, they build themselves as the world's friendliest missile. It's a 3D printed missile that fires out this cloud of rubber bands that clogs up the propellers, the rotors of a offending drone. So it doesn't actually have to hit the drone, it doesn't have to destroy it. And the drone just drops to the ground, and you can actually examine the unfriendly drone. This is probably my coup d'etat company, Vita Inclinata. For those of you who ever seen a helicopter hoist operation, the basket under the helicopter is bashing around, swinging around, spinning around, destroying things, killing people. So what they've made is a little jetpack which sits on the bottom of the hoist line. It's useful for both helicopter hoisting operations as well as crane operations. You can now pick and place objects with your crane without any human intervention, without anybody in a tag line, and be able to place it perfectly, exactly, whatever angle position you like. This is a capability they've called Fly to Target. If anybody's familiar with the Future Vertical Lift program, this is now become a requirement, but you can actually fly the basket well out of the rotor wash of the helicopter onto sides of mountain, inside the windows of buildings, things like that. These guys are doing great. They're already in production. They have a big contract with the U.S. Army Medevac. All right, I'll sum it up. I violated my 3 minutes, didn't I? All right. I'll still have time for some questions. Anyway, we're doing very well with Congress. The Alliance is doing very well with Congress. This whole make-buy decision, they get it. They get it. The staffers in Congress that I'm dealing with were like, when I discussed this at length, like, we understand. Our innovation ecosystem, we have to make an innovation ecosystem where when an innovation is discovered, it has to be hurled and thrust into the hands of our warfighters faster than it's currently being done. And these are the mechanisms to do it, and this is what I'm doing for my day job now, even though I don't work for anybody, I don't get paid, but I still do this. M&S, every once in a while I hear about still another GOTS program that was rearing its ugly head. I think M&S may need its own Palantir moment, and that would put a big institutional hole in this community, which is great, and would steer it now, permanently in a correct direction. So, last thought. I want to thank the Fellows Committee for putting me here. There's a reason I'm here. It was for this message. I have the greatest cause to be optimistic because the ITSEC committee decided this is a message that they wanted the community to hear and to honor, which is fabulous. I will stop now and invite questions for the next 2 minutes or whatever. 3 minutes. Any questions? I apologize for the short time. What was that?
You hit the turbos. It was great.
Yeah, I thought I'd have quite a bit more time for questions. Are there any questions? Go ahead, please.
There's an effort going on to create software factories inside the DoD. How does that fit into your thinking?
So there are good ones like Kessel Run. If you're familiar with the Air Force's Kessel Run, which came out of Boston, they partner quite heavily with commercial software product companies, and they don't make things that are available off the shelf, which is the exact right model. They do make things that are quite frankly not available off the shelf, and they do in fact augment things that are available off the shelf. So that's the good way to do it. The bad way is to put blinders on, pretend that there's no commercial items out there, and then duplicate or replicate things that already exist, which is illegal. As I've pointed out, it is illegal. So I do think that a commercial vendor that is aggrieved at this point, it would be well worth their while to complain and to halt the types of efforts that might duplicate commercial items. And they, as you saw by the Palantir example, there is now good, healthy case law on file that will stop, can and will stop these type of duplications. So some software does have to be made inside the DoD, but if the effort is conscientious about and does market research, is conscientious about what's out there already and uses it and buys it, great. So
Who owns the digital twin, and how do you contract for it?
that's a very, very good question. So it depends who makes the vehicle. If Boeing decided to make a digital twin of the 787, they of course own it. Okay. If the government would, is going to pay a contract to make the F-36, or the Black Dart from the Top Gun movie, the government should probably own it if they are paying cost plus fixed fee every last penny. In general, a company who invests money out of its own pocket, the very definition of a commercial item can be found in FAR 2.101, and it's an outstanding piece of little legislation. You should go read it. It defines exactly what is a commercial item and what is not. If a company develops a commercial item with money out of its own pocket, it should own the digital twin if it invested out of its own pocket, okay? Just like they own the patents and design drawings of the thing they made. A digital twin is part of that IP stack. Anything else? Nothing? Wow, finished right on time. It's amazing. Wow, 5:30 on the nose. Amazing. Thank you all. Thanks, guys. It's been a lot of fun.